Hello, my name is Michael Polacek. This video is a recording of the Nurse Policy Entrepreneurial Café that we conducted on July 8th, 2023. We spoke with Denyc Boles, who was a former Oregon State legislator. She also served as an aide, so she had some pretty interesting insights and practical observations and shared some experiences that I know would help any nurse be able to be more effective as they approach their legislators and the legislative system in influencing healthcare policy, whatever the issue is. I hope this is helpful.
I have been with Salem Health for about almost 8 years. I went there originally as their government affairs person, and then transitioned into a community benefit, community relations role because I ended up running for office. So, I mean, that's not the only reason, but you can't do both. Obviously, there's a conflict there. And so that kind of shifted some of the things. So I would take leaves of absence and go in and out of my job at the hospital. And I kept my job at the hospital because in Oregon, this is in theory a citizen legislature. And while most of the legislators probably don't have outside jobs, I felt like for me, it was really important to continue to be connected to the people that I was serving, and to have that sort of practical everyday experience, because when you get into sometimes in the Capitol, you lose. It's easy to kind of be in your own echo chamber. We'll just leave it at that. So just a little background. I've been probably involved in government and community work my whole life, my whole adult life. Sorry, my screen is kind of moving around. And I don't, Michael asked me to kind of, how did I get here? And I don't have a clear path. I've just always been very interested in history and government and making my community better in a variety of ways. And there's a lot of places that you can do that. And for me, I just was intrigued by the public policy side of this, and being able to connect with people and use your experiences and and take that to the political world. And I find that a lot of people are really intimidated by the political world, and there's a lot of perceptions about it. Some of them are very accurate, some of them are not, but it is a bit of a rough and tumble, and it is ugly and hard. And I learned that in a new way in my service there. But so I served in the state house as a representative and also in the Senate. And I've been out for about 2.5 years at this point, and went back to my day job and continue to do that for Salem Health. And that allows me to connect in my role with lots of nonprofits and county and different government entities to try to coalition people together to make changes. And that's just kind of what has driven me in my life. So that is a little bit, I guess, about, I started as a staffer. I worked as a staffer in the legislature. I've worked as a lobbyist. I've worked as in nonprofits. I've done community advocacy. I've done things that are paid and unpaid. And so, here I am kind of wondering what I want my next steps to look like. And I don't have a completely clear answer about that today. But it's really valuable to be able to see a problem and bring some solutions and make things happen that improve the people that you live with and around. So I look at it as just neighbor serving neighbor, and it's been really one of the biggest privileges of my life. So anyway, I'm here to talk a little bit about just some of the practical pieces of this, answer questions. I'm not quite sure where you guys are within your learning together. Michael, do you want to give me a direction of where you want me to go?
Well, I sent you a couple of ideas. That's kind of it. I think just follow through
with your pathway so we understand what it looks like to be a legislator. And I think we have no idea. The only way we understand it is however it's been given to us, either through media or movies. And I just think it's an
Yeah.
entirely different planet, the language. How do you connect? How do you get your ideas? How do you move your agenda effectively? And I think for us, what we want to learn and become competent at is how do we introduce our agenda and promote policy that we feel like is critical to healthcare. And so maybe talking to us about how we might get better insight into how that world is.
You know, it is a lot of relationship building and a lot of coalition building. And I think that it's easy to underestimate how even small engagements really impact it. I can really speak best from my experience in Oregon, because this is where I've lived most of my life. I have done some things in other states, including Arizona and Virginia, and but not to the anywhere close to the level. And this is my home. I grew up here and raised my family here. So in Oregon, the way that you have every legislator has staff, and that is not always the case depending on your state. I mean, I visited the state capitol in Vermont a number of years ago, and it was startling. They didn't even have offices. They just had a desk, and maybe they had some space outside of the Capitol. Their committee rooms were very small, like a little conference room. In Oregon, you have a dais of anywhere between 3 to 8 or 10 committee members, and you have an audience, and you have lobby, and you have signups, and you have all these things. And so I think it kind of depends on the size of your state, probably impacts it, and how the legislature is made up in your state. But the very first thing I would say would be to make a connection with your local person. Introduce yourself. I mean, if they are a good legislator, they're going to want to meet with you. I always bumped. I had a priority. My staff knew the priority, and I live in Salem, which is the capital, and I served in Salem. So I had a lot more, I would say, outside people, I call them regular people, coming into my office, because it was close. Other parts of our state, it's a 7-hour drive, and so you didn't have quite as many random drop-bys as I did. But making that connection, whether you just send an email, say, oh, hey, I appreciated your vote on X legislation. Just however that makes sense for you. You can be part of, if you're part of an association or a union, or generally they have lobby days, or they have days at the Capitol where you go in and they have an agenda. And that's a really kind of a nice way to, maybe a less intense way to make a connection, because you have somebody else that's, making the agenda and making the introductions. But then I would just follow up. If you do something, you participate in that, I would just follow up and just say, hey, I really enjoyed my visit. I know things are really crazy, but if you go into interim, or when you have some downtime, I'd love to make an appointment and sit down and talk to you about some of the things that I think are important to our community. I would be shocked if someone wouldn't make time for you to do that. And if they don't, I would consider working on their opponent's campaign.
Okay.
Because it's, this is the level that we're at. If you're in Washington, D.C., it's a little bit more complicated. I don't know that realm as well as I know state politics. And aside even from the House and the Senate, there's a lot of committees that are formed. There's a lot of task forces that are formed. They need medical, they need nurses, they need different people. Sometimes they'll say, we have a spot for X task force for this mental health specialist or this nurse specialist or whatever. And so, the other thing I would say is, don't presume people's opinions based on either what someone's told you or their whatever political party they're identified with. It's not as clean and clear as sometimes I think the world wants to make it. And people make a lot of presumptions about where you stand on an issue. or maybe you won't be moved on an issue. I mean, regardless of the political orientation of whoever your representative or senator is, don't let that detract. You will find that you will have a lot more in common with that person than you have, not in common. I think that this is my personal, like, I'm going to go off script here, but it is something I think we need to do in this country, is be a little bit more engaging and listening, and allowing people to make a mistake or get something wrong and not just cut them off for life. I think I've been disturbed by this intensity in both parties these last few years, and some of the followers to create these really hard walls around political positions. And my experience is just really not the case. I would say, I worked a lot across party lines, especially on healthcare issues, on mental health issues, on education. I mean, there are things that we were like, okay, well, we agree 70%. And I'm always looking for what that looks like, because I think it's I want to make a connection with someone, because I think you can do things. And then you'll have things that are like, okay, well, we're never going to see eye to eye. I can't even believe that you have that opinion, but oh well, and try to move on. And so, this is not a huge time-consuming effort. It doesn't have to be, because it is that connection. I would get a lot of emails, a lot of, and I could tell when they were being generated from something was happening, and so they'd send out the alarm that you need to, contact, Senator Boles and tell her yes or no, or whatever the issue is. And that matters, because you're getting all those things and all this stuff. But if you already had contacted me, and we had a connection, and then you wrote me another personal letter saying, hey, what are you thinking? Why, I'm going to engage with that, or I'm going to pay attention to that, because people just don't do it. Honestly, people don't take the time to engage with their legislator that much. And they feel like it needs to be this really big thing, and it could just be a 2-sentence email.
Denise, can I ask you a question? Because
Yeah.
I do know, particularly my national senators, really well. They phone call me. It's that bad. They're like pen pals. But then I belong to several.
Just pause for a second. You have established a position of trust, and you are someone that they count on. And that is a great end goal. And that can absolutely happen, because we're not experts on everything. Okay, go ahead, Doctor.
This is, I belong to a lot of professional organizations, as I'm sure people here do too. And I get these things, and I'll just say, I'm a parish nurse. So I get this. I am an Episcopalian, and, and it's written, by the Episcopal diocese. And I modify it. What would be your suggestion? I mean, should I remind them that and should I not do that? Should I send based on that alert, like cut a little piece out of it and do that? Or I would, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always a fan of not yelling at people online or in person, or however that's perceived. And I get it, as I mean, people are upset, and they have a right to be. There's some incredibly upsetting things that are happening, so I can kind of filter that out. But I would say, Michael asked me something about being a bad actor, or how to engage, and I would say a couple of things. I would use.
These are not bad, but they're clearly, somebody wrote it, and all I'm doing is signing it. Right. Does that impress, or no? I
would, if you have the time, I would write something in your own words. I think that it's personal, because I mean, sometimes people copy and paste things, and they leave out, like, there's a parentheses where you're supposed to put in your own something, and that's just isn't part of it. And it does matter, because you actually have taken a step to do something, but it's less impactful I would just say, if you can, do your personal words, and if there's some message or some talking points, pick one or two that really matter to you, that you want to express. I would say, in most cases, the shorter the better. I mean, if you write a 4-page letter, depending on how busy that day is. It may or may not get written. And sometimes you need to, like, you can just say, hey, you can do something like, this is my opinion, and then here's some background information I really want you to have. That's valuable. And I can't say how that always lands, but as I said, you're having to be an expert on a lot of things. And that's why I think it's really important, especially for, I call it kind of your rank and file, the people that are on the ground, to give their opinion, because everyone on this call has seen legislation come through that you have to implement in your job or in your hospital or in your clinic or wherever. That makes no sense and is not practical. You can kind of understand what they're wanting to accomplish, but you actually aren't accomplishing it, because you had a bunch of politicians deciding what they should do in healthcare, and maybe one person in that room had any experience in healthcare. And it's not that they're not trying to do good things. It's just, honestly, they do not know. And, and my encouragement to you is to not underestimate how important your thoughts are, because this is, just like you advocate for your patients, you're advocating for your patients at the legislative level. It is the same thing you do every day. You're just doing it in a different arena, because you're advocating either for something that's going to directly benefit your patients, or the healthcare world that you work in, or that's going to benefit your job or your coworker or whatever, which still benefits your patients. So and if you think about it, because for me, I ended up doing a lot of things that, I never in a million years would have expected I would be in the legislature. I'd been involved, I'm behind the scenes. I don't think it's that cool. And I didn't, there's a lot of really hard things about it that don't fit my personality very well, because I'm not very good at pretending. I'm not a butt kisser. I'm just like straightforward. Let's do things, let's bring this together. And so there's a lot of little gamemanship that I have to decide, okay, I'm just going to do this because it'll make it easier to do X, and learning some of those things, but I'm still not awesome at that part. But I also think people like me are valuable, because I think our community members want to have someone who's pretty common sense and practical about things, at least as part of some of the conversations. So I figure that's what I bring to the table. But again, I never thought this would be something that I would do. But I remember I was actually appointed in an interim, a 6-month interim, and I wasn't running. And for a lot of, anyway, I ended up sitting on this dais with my legislators. I never voted on, I never was in session. We just had committee meetings. But I remember one day, I did 2 things during that period of time. One is I introduced a piece of legislation that made video voyeurism a felony in the state of Oregon. And what had happened in our state is that we had video, all of that, our laws had not kept up with how the world was changing. And I had someone in my community came to me, said, look, this is what happened. And it was a very, and the DAs in 2 counties. And so anyway, it was a misdemeanor, this, secret video recordings in their homes and different places. And there was no real consequence for it. And so I introduced this legislation, and then I left office because I was only there for 6 months. So 2 things. One, I was sitting in committee and I looked around, I'm like, I'm as good as these guys. Like, I want to, this is cool. I could do this, but I wasn't planning on doing that anytime, maybe ever. The other thing is I left office and I continued to work this piece of legislation. And so I had taken all of my relationships that I built in the Capitol over the last, at that point, 10, 12 years. Staffers, don't ever underestimate the power of a staffer. I've watched people walk in and get all pissy and blow past them and want to see the senator and just be kind of a jerk, or dismissive, or disrespectful. I mean, lots of times those people are the gatekeepers. And I watched someone disrespect someone. I was telling this to Michael, who was not only the chief of staff of the senator, but also was her daughter-in-law, whether they knew this or not. And I thought, oh, honey, you're never, ever going to see the Senate. And they have the power to do things. So I actually, because I'd worked as staff, used my staff relationships to get my bill on the short list of the chairman of the judiciary bill, who is in an opposite party of mine, and get on his. And so anyway, we ended up introducing it as a committee bill because I didn't want it to become political football within party things. And I'm getting a little bit into the weeds, but then I took my merry band of volunteers, and it was kind of the timing. There's some things that happened across the state of Oregon that made this really relevant. So I ended up doing television, which I was horrified to think I would ever do that. And so I'm thinking I'm going to have a short little interview. I had an hour one-on-one with, our NBC person, Laurel Porter, and I did well, because when I went in there, I thought, okay, this is not about you and how dumb you think you're going to look, or if your hair looks good, or all these things. It's like, this is an important step in order to accomplish the passing of this bill. And so when I could kind of take it off my own insecurities, so to speak, it helped. So I'm saying that story is like, when you look at something like, this is really hard, this is not my personality, I don't want to do this. Sometimes what you're advocating for is more important than how you're feeling about it. And I just, it takes courage. For me, I ended up, it was, people would say, oh, this is a nice bill. Don't worry if it doesn't pass, because sometimes it takes years, year after year after year, you reintroduce this stuff. Anyway, long story short is I passed this bill in that short session as a volunteer without hiring lobbyists. And I mean, it's very unusual. I happen to know how to do the process, and I worked around it. And then about 2 or 3 years after that, I ran into one of the DAs in the community who came up to me, and she just says, I want you to know I've put people in jail because of that. And now, I'm not an advocate that everyone goes to jail, but I am an advocate that people go to jail who hurt children. And there is a consequence that happens for them. I think it's an appropriate response. And so then about 2 years after that, the opportunity came, the seat opened up, and I thought, man, look what I was able to do as just a citizen legislator, whatever. And so I ran for office. So those types of things, I did things that I thought I couldn't do. And then I'm like, okay, I could do this. Isn't that bad? And so, I just say that because I wasn't particularly intimidated by the process, but I was maybe intimidated by my role in the process. What could I actually accomplish? So
That's a great story. Can I ask
yeah.
you, can you go back to the role of the aide and talk about how the process of that relationship works, and do things go through the aide, and talk about that?
It just really depends on the office. Most legislators really have to rely on their staff because there's just not enough time in the day to know things. And so if someone says, hey, it's like, let's say you make, I want to come talk to the senator about this bill, and you get told, oh, the senator's really, her schedule is full, which is absolutely the truth. I mean, I had 15-minute meetings. My whole life is down to 15 minutes for an entire day. And if they forgot to put in my lunch, then I had no lunch because someone scheduled over lunch. So your scheduler is doing that, and it could be all the same person. But if they say, but would you like to talk to, Jonathan, who is the healthcare policy person in the office? And that's, don't feel butthurt because you didn't get to meet with the senator. I mean, meeting with the staff is still incredibly valuable because they're going to take notes. They're going to upload it, into their bill file. They're going to talk about, at the end of the day, who did you meet with? What are your thoughts? If you don't have a trusted relationship with your staffer, I don't think the staff will last very long. It's important. So, the staff can make the agenda, they set the schedule, they determine lots of times who gets in and who doesn't. Hopefully the elected officials giving some parameters of how this looks. You know, whereas in my case, people who are in my community, I started to say this earlier and didn't finish, but they always had priority over any lobbyist, anybody else that was coming in. If I had, you know, Jennifer from Salem Health that made an appointment to come see me, I was going to see Jennifer from Salem Health. And I was going to reschedule the professionals because they're in the building every single day. So they can be rescheduled. And it's not that I don't value what they're doing. They bring lobby brings a lot of important information. If you have part of an association that hires lobbyists, which I imagine whether you realize it or not, you probably are, or there's someone representing your industry, those people provide information, really important information. You need to make sure they have that information. And engage in some of the policy making on some of these associations because they're representing you in the legislature. And sometimes I've noticed can be a disconnect between the leadership of an association and the people that are doing the work. And so just to make sure that is, I mean, sometimes the lobbyist has no healthcare background. They just know policy. And that's not, it's not bad. It's just, again, that's sometimes how you get these pieces of legislation that don't make sense.
So if I had an issue as an individual, I'm not representing ANA or anybody else. I just have a real concern with suicide prevention, right? I think that since let's say you're on the mental health committee, so you have some say over how policy is addressed. How is the best way for me and how should I prepare myself? What should I bring to be effective in influencing how important you think that issue is?
Yeah. You know, the chair in Oregon, the chair of the committees makes the agenda. They're the ones that decide what bills get a hearing, what bills get voted on, what bills get off of that. And it's, I mean, in Oregon, it's very, very heavily weighted on who the majority party. And so it is incumbent upon back to so you have the chair, so then you have the committee. So if your personal state representative is, on judiciary and, whatever, I mean, other committees, actually judiciary does a lot of healthcare stuff, but you want to make a connection and you can ask them, just say, hey, I have this legislation or this idea, or I want you to know this. Can you share this information with the committee chair or with, whomever that you want to hear this? And they're the ones that make the decision on the legislation that gets passed. So on mental health stuff, so I was vice chair of mental health when I was in Senate. And I had a great working relationship with my committee chair. And he always checked in with me. I was Senator Arnie Roblin, and what are my thoughts? I made him Dr. Chandragiri. He always says, he goes, you made me drive 8 hours across the state of Oregon. I mean, I didn't make him do anything. I just provided the opportunity. But we spent 3 days, going through a different kind of delivery system for mental health in a smaller community in rural Oregon. And Dr. Chandragiri is here in Salem and was a constituent of mine. And we just forged a really good friendship. And he just says, I would really like to show you this. And I said, okay. And I would like to see that. And then I opened it up to my committee, and there's probably 30 people that showed up. And I was, again, minority party. And so it was, there's just a lot of unusual things that you can do. And again, back with, Dr. Beeman, that is, the end goal is to be that trusted person. And you don't have to necessarily be super like hierarchical in your health system, or the way it works in the legislature is it's just a different dynamic than the outside world. And so, you know, for me, that trusted relationship is, first of all, don't lie to me. That seems really basic, but a lot of people make up stuff, and then it's over. Like, it's like, oh, well, okay, I don't actually trust you now. And you know, you can say hard things, or we can disagree. That's easy. I mean, that's not a problem. But being straight and being someone that is available, or just say, hey, I don't have an answer to that, but I would like you to talk to so-and-so colleague. I mean, just that kind of networking. You know, I had my people, and I knew how to get information, but that is one of them. So the staff, you know, they can help the legislator set the agenda. They can have opinion. I mean, I had someone on my staff I really trusted her, and she had worked in healthcare for a long time, and she would come to me and she says, you know, we should look at this. I'm like, okay, let's look at this. You know, I mean, there's just people who are engaged and aggressive in a good way. You'll get places with that.
I had an experience. I testified for this is a few years ago for the changing policy for nurses being assaulted on the job. And so we were looking at some kind of change in how they address the criminality of it. I mean, of course, right now you punch somebody in the face, it's against the law, but it's a higher level of crime if you do that to a taxi driver or a bus driver. And so we were bringing that in. If we're trying to save someone's life and we get in and get slugged, it impacts somebody's life. And so I testified, and then we went to they pushed it to the Ways and Means Committee, and the chair of that committee at that time had been a legislator for probably 140 years. And he started the session by saying, I've pretty much made my decision. I feel, you know, guys can try and convince me otherwise, but this is not going to roll. We have no funds to explain. And so I didn't realize that was something that could happen in a committee. It just sounded bizarre, but it seemed normal. And so I think the more I became involved, these strange idiosyncrasies within the legislative process, it was important to me to understand them better. And so I think you'd probably agree, if you were interested in this, start going to as many committee meetings and going to as many sessions as you can to get a sense for how things work, so that when you do develop rapport and relationships, there are less faux pas. You have a better chance of helping somebody come to your opinion. Do you have a thought on that?
No, I mean, I think that's accurate. Everyone seems to the question is trying to figure out what are people's agendas and what are the prisms that they look through to come to a decision. I find that almost everything ends up being there's some sort of money connection. It doesn't matter what the issue is. And some of that takes some time to figure out. You know, there's reputations of different legislators that you can start to know if you really are paying attention. You know, when it comes to testifying is pretty intimidating in person, but you can also submit written testimony. But if you have the opportunity or you're asked to testify, the fact again that you are not someone that does this professionally as far as being in the government, your voice is really important, and whoever will probably prepare you and tell you, like, this is what this person might ask a question. For the most part, I would say the legislators are pretty respectful for the person coming in to do this, but sometimes you could get someone who is kind of a jerk, and you just have to that's on them. It's not on you. So yeah, I mean, you know, interestingly, you brought up the violence on nurse staffing and all that. And I actually don't know what happened this last cycle, because it comes back every year. I'm gonna take a little risk here, but one of the things that I find, because it seems pretty obvious, it's like, all right, let's protect, you know, our frontline staff. One of the barriers in that, and I don't know enough specifically of where things have gotten to currently, so I don't want to overstate this, but one of the hiccups in getting that legislation passed is actually the Oregon Nurses Association. And the reason is because they use that as a part of their contract negotiations. And so, I mean, I'm looking at your face, Dr. Beeman, and so it's one of those things where I am not going to make a judgment on whether that's right or wrong, but not every nurse is under in a lobby or in a union. Yes. And then, and again, it's like, this seems some good policy, but there is a benefit to the organization to keep it a little bit fluid so that they can use it to help their nurses. So, but it's just kind of one of those funny things. It's like, wait, and that's why I kind of go back to make sure that you think about what the legislation, how you feel about it, and ask those types of questions. And there may be some really good answers. I haven't talked to the ONA about it specifically of why they, but part of me, it's become a really important piece of legislation in my opinion. And I don't know what caveats need to be made for them to release some of their opposition. So, but that's one of those things. It is like sausage making. It's not as clear as it may initially present itself. Does somebody have a question? Oh.
Does anybody have a question or comment or want to weigh in on this?
I'm reading your chats right now.
Well, for that, when I went in and testified right after the testimony, I went out to lunch with I don't know if she was a chair or she was something, president of the public defenders group. I don't remember what they call themselves. And they are adamantly against that. So you have a bunch of attorneys. And then if you have the ANA, which is a pretty strong union in Oregon, right there, how do you go about that without some kind of expensive promotion and media blitz and changing culture? I mean, I could see where there's a point where some of the stuff doesn't move because you don't have the means.
Sometimes in those situations, honestly, public opinion starts to swing things, because if it gets framed as you are not voting to protect frontline healthcare workers, that doesn't look good in somebody's portfolio. And the nuances of why become less relevant, because the average voter and the average citizen, they aren't going to take 7 steps to get to your opinion, And so, I mean, honestly, when you talk about in my case, it was a criminal defense, the head of the person with my privacy bill, she came up to me and she goes, I looked at your bill and we hate it the least, so we're going to leave it alone. And I tried to frame it in a very simple, straightforward, not trying to, throw everything into the kitchen sink. So I eliminated that opposition.
Right. I think it circles back to your opening statement. We tend to focus on, and I hear this in Virginia, a Democrat proposed it, like the evil, or a Republican proposed it, or the evil, or the unions, or whatever. And it's, I bet you, I mean, I don't know anything about this bill, but just having spent 50 minutes with you, I bet you found common ground. I was on Capitol Hill trying to promote simply something for research as to why Black women have such a high mortality rate in giving birth.
Yes.
It's skin tone, folks. It's not even, it's a social construct. So having such trouble just reproducing themselves, And so what I said was, is there a woman you love? Because some of those assistants are gay and they don't have a woman that they love, but they have a mother, or there might be a woman in there. And you know what? Every single one of them had a woman they loved, And I don't care if they were Republican or they were Democrat, there was a woman they loved. So if we can find, and I have to tell you a funny story. I was speaking on active shooter incidents that has nothing to do with this, but I was in a little place called in Appalachia. There was one place to eat breakfast in the morning, and it was one of those long table things, you know?
Yeah.
And so I sat in the one chair that was left, and who sits next to me but a congressman who's the head of the Commerce Committee. Now, did I comment that French fries are not an appropriate breakfast? Could have, but didn't. Okay. Did I talk about gun control, which you don't use those two words together in Virginia? Okay, I
I was
don't know
gonna say,
where you
maybe
live.
not in Appalachia.
Nope, I chose not to pick those. I talked about human trafficking. He's the head of the Commerce Committee.
Mhm.
And I had 45 minutes while he was eating his French fries for breakfast. Questionable choice. But anyway, while he sat there and ate his French fries, I talked to him about human trafficking. And 2 weeks later, there was a bill before Congress on human trafficking. So, you know, you seize these opportunities, but you also do it diplomatically. And I bet you, Denise, just knowing you for 52 minutes now, you found common ground instead of starting with those crazy unions, comma, right? I don't think that's going to get us anywhere.
Well, I mean, and again, yeah, it doesn't. And but it's not, it's popular to, you know, I've had people come to me about running for different things or whatever. And I said, if you want someone that's going to light their hair on fire, I'm not your girl. But it works in an election, and we are polarizing our people. And that's the other thing I didn't really talk about, but helping someone on a campaign, that's a really big deal. I mean, most people don't do it. I mean, it's hard, it's ugly, it's weird. You know, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but if you find someone that you like, or let's say you live in a district that is overwhelmingly, you know, one party. So I live in a swing seat, what they call it. It swings back and forth. So it could be Republican, Democrat. Most of Oregon, I mean, you get up into Portland area, it's predominantly Democrat. I mean, there are parts of there are House districts in Portland that the electorate may be 7% Republican. And so they're never going to vote for a Republican. So if I'm a Republican and I live in Northwest Portland, I may go and volunteer on the Democrats' campaign, and to be able to bring my ideas forward. You know, it doesn't mean you're selling your soul to the devil or whatever. And I mean, it sounds a little bit, but it is. I mean, it is self-serving, I guess, but it's not particularly self-serving to you. It's particularly self-serving to the ideas you want entree. You want to be able to bring things to the table. And again, back to the partisan divide, it's not as extreme as the media wants you to believe. I mean, certainly there are people who are extreme, and those, you know, there are people I wouldn't, you know, waste my breath. They're never going to listen to you, and you can make that determination. But I would say 60 to 70% of the people running for office in either party are going to be able to have a conversation with you about your ideas. So Bill Clinton and McDonald's. Oh, Bill Clinton took so much heat for that.
Hey, they get paid
America.
They get paid for that. Sorry, they get paid to take heat.
Oh, you really don't get paid that much.
Well, he did well. He did.
Yeah,
well.
he ended up doing fine.
Yeah, he did all right. He probably doesn't go there anymore.
Who knows?
So I think what you just said was important. Sometimes it feels like you can get nowhere. So I think looking at how this is a bigger picture, how do you create a change in societal perception? And so, like right now, back in the 50s and 60s, everybody smoked, right? Well, something changed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just because John Wayne said, hey, quit smoking, it'll kill you like it's killing me. Something changed about the culture. And I think it's probably
A little bit.
A
with
little,
John
a
Wayne,
little bit,
you
and Yul
know?
Brynner and all those, they changed a little bit, but I think there was probably, then you heard the big legislation and the civil suits and all, so there was like this, and I don't think there was one person behind it, but maybe thinking about getting involved not only with the legislature, but finding an organization that does this kind of work specifically. Most of the nursing organizations are organized in the IRS as nonprofit charitable organizations, and they cannot promote a political issue or a political person, but you can provide information and education. So you can testify. Here's best practice for suicide prevention in schools. Here's what SAMHSA says. So by testifying that, you can probably do that, influence individuals in that. But I'm just wondering how many people get involved in organizations that are effective, because it just seems like organizations have more pull than individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really, it just depends on your community and your state, a lot of that. But professional organizations that you're a part of, they all have policy arms to them. If they don't, I would find another one to go to, because they're not, you want to be part of something that's not just, I mean, I assume, again, I work in politics. I want to be part of something that's not just, we're going to get together and complain about the state of the world. And so, you know, I would go to things and I would see, you know, who, so in Oregon, I mean, gosh, it's just, there's, and also pay attention to the things, the swings of issues, and may not be your issue. But maybe this is your opportunity. Like in Oregon, we are having a lot of conversations about mental health, really serious conversations. It's becoming more serious because now they're putting money to it. That's the other thing. Figure out how serious they are. If they make it a financial commitment, and I say that within the current structure. So a lot of times things will come through the fore and they'll be like, okay, we want to do X and we're going to add this fee or this tax, or we're going to bring in new revenue, which is fine. But then now you're in a growing the government conversation, not a conversation about the issue that maybe be driving. So if you came to me, I would be, you know, there were things, I don't know, different issues, you know, but I wanted to make it a bigger priority in our current government structure. I'm not saying, because, you know, those things trigger other things. That's where you get a little bit of your Democrat Republican, you know, breakdown, because in Oregon, I mean, basically Republicans tend to be a smaller government kind of, this is how I look at it. And the Democrats in my state tend to be a little bit more grow government and have them, you know, agencies and all that sort of thing be the decision makers. So so those are the things. People may not oppose your issue, but they may oppose the process to do it. So you know, so that is one thing to kind of to be aware of. But and now I can't remember where I was going with that. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Go ahead, Michael.
I don't really have much. Now, when we talk about in this group, we look at policy at different levels. There's a national level where as an individual, I'm not, unless I'm Elon Musk, I'm not going to have any voice really. At the state level, I have a voice. At the city level, county level, I have an even bigger voice. I can go, if we're talking about politics, I can go to the school board, I can go to county commissioners, I can go to city hall, but I'm also thinking of policy in broader terms. If I'm on the board of directors for the Humane Society, which we know people love their animals and it's probably some of the best mental health treatment there is, we know that folks that have decided to die by suicide, they will bring their pets there so the pet won't be alone. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't all the folks working at the Humane Society be trained to identify somebody's at risk and maybe be able to intervene? Mm-hmm. So if I'm on the board of directors for that, I can implement policy right there. I can bring in the nurse's perspective and change policy at that level. So not everything that we do is political. Oh, that's a piece. Mm-hmm. I also am, you know, we also talk about other roles too. So I'm thinking about getting Dr. Chandagiri on here, talking about his role at the school board. He's had a heck of a time.
Oh, gosh.
When he started, they had no policy on suicide prevention. Imagine a school of 50,000 kids with no policy for suicide prevention. And so he has a great story. So I might try and bring him in, and as we talk with folks, maybe we can bring other voices in. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you have more to say, but I really appreciate what you had so
even
far.
on that, Michael, I was thinking, I don't even remember the bill, but I was talking to a bill on the House floor, and I was making the connection that everybody, no matter where you are in your profession or in the community, there are things that you can do on suicide prevention. And oh, Dr. Beeman, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm sorry, just your daughter, yeah. But and so I brought up QPR in my speech, and afterwards I had a colleague on the other side of the aisle come over to me and wanting to know more, and I was actually kind of surprised she didn't already know about this. But as a result, we actually, I think it was a check which is part of Salem Health, which is literally like a long block away from the Capitol. I mean, the hospital and the Capitol are very close to each other. They opened up an entire legislative training on QPR. And because of, because I was basically just saying something like this can help give people tools. And I know that they've done that like within real estate companies and just different things, of making that more mainstream. So you just never quite know what you say, or like you're sitting next to a congressman at, eating French fries. It's hard to know how that's going to play out, but yeah,
but you influence policy not through any legislation.
Correct.
Just by talking with someone else. And so I think that's stuff that we can do all the time.
Right.
I don't want to get narrow-minded about the only way we could change the planet is by getting our senators and Congress people and president to do things. There are so many other realms to change where we live. And that was a great example of that. You just talked to somebody that said, well, yeah, that's stupid. Why don't we do that?
I said it I said it in a speech on the floor, and it was, recorded and highlighted, and then, a bunch of legislators and staff held a training. Yay. I'm telling you, if someone needs a training, it's the people, or QPR training, it's in that building. All right. Well.
Any other questions or thoughts?
What was QPR? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Question, persuade, refer. It's a kind of questions to ask people who to identify if someone is really struggling with suicide ideation. So basically it's a 2-hour and that was something I did at the hospital and with the school district, is getting their entire school district trained in this. And when that first happened, they were just like, oh, because there were 4 or 5 suicides at my kids' high school within a very short amount of time. And so,
and by the way, after that, 2 of the parents died by suicide.
I didn't know that.
Did you know that? Yeah. It's such an insidious contagion thing, and they did not have a policy for suicide prevention at that time.
Yeah.
It's just how can
yeah. No, it is quite surprising, because we did I went around and presented to places, to school districts, on curriculum, on different things that they could integrate within their school system, and it was a lot easier. Salem Kaiser School District is either the first or second largest school district in the state, which is where I live and my kids are part of. That was really, it's hard to partner with them. It is, and it's not, I don't think because they don't want good intentions. It's just a big, huge beast of an organization. But yeah, it's just devastating. It's devastating to watch. So, but yeah, so those types of things. So I had a little bit of experience. I'm not I don't have a healthcare background per se, but I have a healthcare policy background. And I know how to bring people together to get on a page. So, but thanks for sharing that, Michael. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Dr. Chandri is really engaged in that. So
yeah, he's awesome.
He shares all his stuff with me.
He takes a lot of heat too. Man, school board I think is worse than the legislature.
He is one tough guy, man. He precepted my doctoral program.
Yeah.
And it was so wonderful to get to spend time with him.
Yeah. He's brilliant. And such a kind heart.
Very sincere.
Yeah.
We've been here for an hour. Does anybody have anything else to share? Or, well,
I just want to say thank you, and thank you for inviting me. It's just hearing you, Denise, and just bringing forth, as nurses, we're patient advocates first and foremost, and so why not? What is the fear of this getting into the policy arena and doing what we do best? I almost feel compelled to do it now. So no, thank you. And it just sounds, and I see Cheryl, you put something that we can each access where we live and work on those local levels. And I've taken away a couple of pearls of wisdom, made some notes of some things that I could start doing right away. And I'm looking forward to attending more of these and hearing from individuals. It was very nice seeing all of you and meeting all of you.
And remember, you can get on the
my
board
favorite psychologist,
anytime.
Dr. Phil, was talking about bullies. Now, when I say bully, I want you to think about the bully you had in elementary school. And you notice how I said the bully?
Mm-hmm.
His name was Gaylord. Can you believe that? But anyway, he was the bully in my elementary school, the bully. Our kids don't have the bully. When there's a bully, all the kids surround and go, yay, bully, yeah, right? Why? Because the bystanders don't stick up for what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm looking at 6 people that know what's right? We know what's right, but you know what? We get timid because we think we're outnumbered by the bullies. How many of you think we're outnumbered by the bullies? But we just don't, you know better. You served in legislature, right? But you know what I'm saying? I think we're timid because we think we're outnumbered by the bullies. We ought to go back to when we were in elementary school and there was one bully named Gaylord, right? Oh, you got it. And we got to realize that if there's just 6 of us on a Saturday morning that think we can change the world, there's thousands of people behind us of like mind. For some reason, they're not speaking up. What do you think?
No, I agree. And I think that don't assume somebody else is going to say it or has said it, and find a friend. You have one, take someone with you. And and the other piece that as far as finding information of getting on newsletters, either the chairman, most legislators have a newsletter, so it helps you at least know what bills are coming up, or things. You don't have to go work too hard to find this stuff. Or something comes across your or something's not working, like what Michael was saying, we didn't have a suicide policy, prevention policy. That's terrible. I mean, and so you would assume that we would have, being the 2nd largest school district in the state. But it took, and it's frustrating, and you're going to be, the world literally is on fire and someone needs to put the fire out. And yet we're taking 5 years to figure out who's going to hold the freaking, hose. And it's very frustrating. And I just encourage you not to give up when you're frustrated, because I mean, you just, I say this to my kids, it's like, we do hard things. You just sit there and go, I can do hard things. You all know that. And look at where you're serving. Being a nurse is not an easy, it's not easy. And so it's just that pursuit of it. And again, don't also, look at within your own capacity. Don't beat yourself up because you can't do all the things. Just go, you know what, I'm going to do this. This is what I can commit to. I have 10 kids at home and I work, 60 hours a week. So you're not going to be able to do all the things. And that's fair. You're in different seasons of life, but you also can do one thing and figure out what that is.
Well, if nobody else has anything, I just like to lead with this. There's a couple of pieces to this work, this cafe. One is to create some kind of a structure and some kind of a reference or a structural support, however you want to see it, to support nurses once they begin to become engaged at whatever level. The second thing is to consider how this cafe is working, because I think it can be implemented in other areas to deal with other wicked problems, to help people come together and have conversations and dialogue. So I think thinking about the way that this cafe is going is important, and maybe thinking about how we can improve on it, how we can make it a better, more effective process. And the other thing I think to take home with you is that if you're here, you like to be inspired, and you know, if you're the kind of person that likes to be inspired, you're in the right group, because we all have a why. The why is more important than the what. You know, my why is when I think of suicide, I have pictures of people in my head. I know people who are struggling or have died. So it's not just, oh, I have an assessment to do today, or it's a kind thing that, no, there's a why that makes me want to make things better. And so when I have things that seem like they may be a barrier, may kind of temper my enthusiasm, they wash off, because that why is just always there. And so if you don't have a why, find one. Find your why and just promote it. And then as you meet people, and you know, maybe they're going to join your why too. And so along with that, if you know people that are interested in possibly what we're doing, I'll do the same thing I've done with everybody here before we have these cafes. I spend a half hour or so and kind of go over what we're trying to do, and if they're interested, great. If they're not, that's fine too. But just draw people into this, because I think this format can make some changes. I think we can do something. I don't know what it's going to look like. This is really play. If you think about it, we're just playing. Can't do anything wrong. It's just playing with something to make it work. And so I'm curious to see what it's going to look like in 2 years. Anybody else have any final comments? Any thoughts before we go?
I was just gonna say, I mentioned it in the chat. I had a lot of luck this spring because some of the organizations and the lobbyists, they get tired of talking to her. They bolt in the other direction when she's coming. But if she has somebody with her, like a nurse practitioner, registered nurse, somebody who is affected by the state, you know, the laws that are in place, and hoping for better laws and policies, they have to give you a couple minutes. Even if they're very busy, they'll give you 30 seconds. So she was great at tracking them down and telling me who's going to be where, when, and we had a little spiel put together and some handouts for new laws and initiatives that are important in the state. And I would talk to them, and it was great. So I got to talk to 7 legislators. 6 were on the health policy committee, and the others, the other one was my local representative from my town. So it was a productive day, and I was only there for like 4.5 hours. So that worked really well.
Leah, could I just ask a quick question? It was, you had said something, you had prepared something to bring with you. Is that generally what, and I'm completely a novice at this, when you go to these lobby days, is it generally something you would bring, you prepare something ahead of time, you have your 30 seconds, and then you can leave them with something?
Yes, it is helpful if you have some kind of a handout. I had 2 things that I covered with them. One of the organizations that I belong to in my is the National Nurse Practitioner Entrepreneur Network, and they're really big into any laws in any state that inhibit full practice authority, because then that makes it difficult for the NP to have their own practice. And you have all these states where you're allowed to have your own practice, but then when it comes down to it, there's all these forms that you're not allowed to sign, and you're supposed to get a collaborative physician who's very expensive and difficult to even find anybody to do it. So we have all these problems. So they employ a lobbyist, and the lobbyists already had a handout made up of what we needed, what laws we need to change to make full practice authority possible in our state. I'm also, because I'm a palliative care nurse practitioner, I'm also a member of Connecticut Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. And so for them, I keep track of the bills in neighboring states that are very good for end of life and advanced care planning. So I had a couple of examples of bills from other states. One was from New York State and one was from the state of Maryland. In Maryland, they allow advanced directives to be available and uploaded at any state office, including the DMV, which is really good because then just about anybody could actually have an advanced directive. New York has some interesting policies where if somebody has a limited prognosis, all providers are required to inform them of that and make it known that they are eligible for hospice and palliative care services if they so choose. That would be huge to have in Connecticut, but we have no such thing. So I typed up, just some really short examples of legislation in some neighboring states that I think would be very valuable, and made sure that they knew about those. So yeah, if it's quick and simple, that's best because they don't have a ton of time to look at pages and pages, but a quick handout is always great because there's only so much you can cover in 30 seconds.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I always try to answer the question, who, what, when, where, why.
Mhm.
And I learned how to write press releases many years ago. That was the forefront, so that if you only had so much time, that first paragraph could really either set the stage for them to look further and be interested, or you could lose them altogether. So I just try to be as precise as possible and clear. Not a lot of mumble jumble jargon, nothing, just who, what, when, where, why. If you can answer that in their mind, anyone is going to be more interested.
I just found a study about that when I had to write up a whole paper for school about all of my legislative activities this spring. And I found a study that recommended that you use the SBAR format for any time that you're meeting with a legislator. And that's similar to what you're saying. So what you're saying is actually evidence-based. There are studies about that.
Yeah, SBAR, that's a good
That's interesting.
for healthcare nurses to use.
At Aspen, when students have, let's just call it an issue with their instructors, we ask them to SBAR it.
Yeah.
So why
Same
not?
with the legislator.
If they have an issue with a legislator, why not?
Yes.
Really, because it's brief. It's all a physician wants to hear. So it's all that a legislator wants to hear.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes you have an issue with brevity and you have to almost rehearse so that you can get the point across in a very short amount of time. And the same thing is true when you're providing testimony, because they will cut you off at 3 minutes, whether you're done or not. So
you haven't gotten to the ask part. Yeah, the important part. But if yes part, half of it is your ask, right?
Right. I did provide testimony this spring as well too, and that was an issue for many people, is trying to get their point across in just 3 minutes time.
Leah, would you be able to share some of that work? So we see stuff as what you produced. It'd be probably nice for other people to see what something might look like.
Yeah. So when I testified this spring, there were two things that I testified for. One was the legislation that promotes full practice authority in the state of Connecticut. We had 3 issues. One was the issue with obtaining collaborative physicians because they're expensive and hard to find, and it affects their if they collaborate with a nurse practitioner at another practice, it affects their malpractice insurance and the cost of it. So that's a problem. So it's just really hard to find collaborative physicians to help out a practice. So that was one thing I testified on. There's other issues where they weren't allowing nurse practitioners that were coming in from out of state to practice without a collaborative physician, even though they had been in practice for a very long time. So we were trying to get that changed. And some other issues as well too, certain forms that we're not allowed to sign. So I testified regarding a situation that I had when I was a really new grad with at a residential treatment facility in a rural area. And the physician on the campus had refused to be a collaborative. He was a psychiatrist, but he didn't want to be the collaborative for the medical APRN, which I could kind of understand. But then they had to bring one in from an agency out of state. And of course, I never met him, and he was very, very hard to get a hold of. There was 5 weeks where I couldn't reach him. And there were safety issues going on at the facility at the same time that I wasn't able to reach him. So my real collaborative ended up to be an APRN colleague with a lot of internal medicine and addiction medicine experience, who was also a professor. And so I was testifying to say that, you know, somebody like that should be my real collaborative and not just the unofficial one. And we need, like all of our neighboring states, we need to be able to use senior APRNs as collaboratives, because we're not having much luck in finding physicians to be collaboratives. We can't pay them enough, and they're too busy, and it's just too hard to find them. So I actually got a video clip of that, because they put all of their testimonies on YouTube. And it goes on for like 14 hours, but I got a clip of just the video of my own testimony. And then the second one was for the medical aid and dying bill this spring, and that comes back every year. And the big problem with that is, while we certainly understand that patients and families want full autonomy over the end of their life, and that's great, but there's some very difficult practical matters that must be considered in bills like that. And so I was testifying regarding some of these difficult practical matters that would affect the state's ability to even be able to provide this. And I wasn't able to get in time to do a virtual testimony or Zoom testimony. So I just submitted that in writing, so I can send out a copy of the written testimony that I provided regarding that, just so you can see what that looks like. And you have a little bit more freedom with the written testimony, because it doesn't have to be exactly 3 minutes. It can't be super long, but it's not like a timed testimony. So it's a little easier, less nerve-wracking that way. But yeah, so I have those things. I have the written one and I have the video clip. I could send you.
Well, this has been really good. Thank you so much, Denise, and everyone, for coming on a Saturday. I appreciate your time, and it's always beneficial. I never know what it's going to be, but it's every single week we find something really exciting that's going on. So,
Well, thank you, Michael, for the invitation, and I enjoyed my time with you. Ladies, thank you for, and you, Michael.